The rhythmic grinding of stone against stone had become the soundtrack of Elena Martinez's existence, a desperate percussion that echoed through the Arizona Territory darkness long after decent folks had surrendered to sleep. It was 11:30 on a sweltering June night in 1882, and her arms trembled with exhaustion as she pushed the heavy mano across the metate, reducing dried corn kernels to the coarse meal that would feed her younger siblings tomorrow. The kerosene lamp flickered beside her, casting dancing shadows across the adobe walls of the small house her father had built before the fever took him 3 years ago. Elena was 22 years old, and she felt ancient. Her mother had died bringing her youngest brother into the world when Elena was 16, and her father had struggled on for 2 more years before succumbing to pneumonia during an unusually harsh winter. That left Elena responsible for Miguel, who was now 9, Sophia, who was 7, and little Thomas, who had just turned 5. The small plot of land outside Tucson was theirs free and clear, but land without the means to work it properly was more burden than blessing. Every day began before dawn and ended well after midnight with Elena grinding enough corn to make tortillas and atole for her family, with enough left over to sell in town to buy the other necessities they could not grow or make themselves. Her back ached something fierce, and her hands were permanently calloused from the grinding. She had tried to teach Sophia to help, but the little girl's arms were not strong enough yet, and Elena could not bear to see her sister's childhood consumed the way her own had been. So she ground the corn alone, night after night, while her siblings slept and dreamed of things that children should dream about. The roosters would crow in less than 5 hours, and Elena still had another hour of grinding ahead of her. She pushed a strand of dark hair from her face with the back of her wrist and bent to her task again, trying not to think about how tired she was, how her dreams of someday having a family of her own seemed to slip further away with each passing season. What man would want a wife whose hands were rough as tree bark and who fell asleep at the supper table from exhaustion? She did not hear the horse approach until it was nearly at her door. Elena's head snapped up, her heart suddenly racing. Visitors after dark were rarely bearers of good news, and a woman alone with 3 children was vulnerable in ways she preferred not to contemplate. She reached for the old rifle her father had kept by the door, checking that it was loaded even though her hands shook slightly. "Hello, the house," a man's voice called from outside, and Elena relaxed slightly at the polite greeting. Bandits did not typically announce themselves so courteously. "I saw your light burning and thought you might be in trouble. It is awful late for folks to be awake." Elena moved to the door but did not open it. "We are fine here. Just finishing up some work. You can be on your way." There was a pause, and then the voice came again, closer now. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but I can hear that grinding stone from out here. Nobody should be working this late unless there is no other choice. I do not mean any disrespect or intrusion. My name is James Thornton. I work for the Carson Ranch, about 10 miles north of here. I was heading back from town and got turned around in the dark, saw your light, and wanted to make sure everything was all right." Something in his voice made Elena believe him. She had become a good judge of character out of necessity, and this man sounded genuinely concerned rather than threatening. Still, she kept the rifle in her hands as she cracked the door open just enough to see him. He was tall, probably close to 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. He had removed his hat and held it respectfully in his hands, and even in the dim light spilling from her doorway, Elena could see that his eyes were kind. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with sun-weathered skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were dusty from travel, but they were well-made and reasonably clean. This was no drifter or troublemaker. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Thornton, but as I said, we are fine. The Carson Ranch is back the way you came, then north at the big cottonwood tree. You cannot miss it." He nodded but made no move to leave. His eyes had drifted past her to where the metate sat on the floor, surrounded by baskets of corn kernels waiting to be ground. "How much corn do you grind in a night?" The question surprised her. I do not see how that is your concern. I apologize. I do not mean to pry. He shifted his weight, and his horse nickered softly behind him. It is just that I have some experience with grinding corn. My mother used to do it when I was a boy back in Texas before we moved west. She ground herself nearly to death trying to keep up with feeding 6 kids and my father. Then my older brother bought her a little hand-cranked mill, and it changed everything. What took her 4 hours suddenly took her 30 minutes. Elena felt something twist in her chest. A mill would be a fine thing to have, Mr. Thornton. Unfortunately, we make do with what we have. He looked at her for a long moment, and Elena saw something flicker across his face that she could not quite identify. Pity, perhaps, or understanding? Whatever it was, it made her straighten her spine and lift her chin. She did not need charity or sympathy from strangers. Well, I will let you get back to your work. I am sorry to have disturbed you. He put his hat back on and touched the brim in a gesture of respect. Good night, ma'am. Good night, Mr. Thornton. Elena closed the door and stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the darkness. Then she returned to her grinding, trying to ignore the way his words had stirred up a longing for things she could not have. A mill. What a luxury that would be. But mills cost money, and money was something the Martinez family had precious little of. She ground corn until 1 a.m, then finally allowed herself to collapse onto her narrow bed, too tired even to undress properly. Her sleep was shallow and restless, filled with dreams of grinding stones that turned into millstones, around and around and around. When the roosters crowed at dawn, Elena dragged herself from bed and began the day. There were animals to feed, a garden to tend, breakfast to make, and then the long walk into Tucson with baskets of cornmeal and tortillas to sell. Miguel and Sophia helped as much as they could, but they were still children, and Elena refused to let them sacrifice their youth the way she had sacrificed hers. The walk into town took nearly an hour, and the sun was already fierce by the time Elena reached the market square. She set up her small display and waited for customers, trying not to think about how tired she was, how her arms still ached from last night's grinding, how she would have to do it all over again tonight. Business was slow that morning. Elena sold enough to buy some beans and a little sugar, but not as much as she had hoped. She was packing up her remaining goods when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Good morning, Miss Martinez. She turned to find James Thornton standing there, hat in hand once again, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined. Mr. Thornton, good morning. I hope you do not mind my approaching you here. I asked around town this morning to find out who you were. I hope that does not seem too forward. Elena felt a flutter of something in her stomach that she firmly told herself was annoyance. Why would you be asking about me? He shifted his weight again, that same nervous gesture from last night. I could not stop thinking about you grinding that corn in the middle of the night, about your hands and your back and how tired you must be. I know it is not my business, and I know we are strangers, but I wondered if you would let me help you. I do not need charity, Mr. Thornton. I am not offering charity. He spoke quickly, as if afraid she would walk away before he could finish. I am offering a trade. You see, I have been saving my wages for a while now. I have been working for Mr. Carson for 4 years, and I am a good cowboy. I save most of what I make because I do not have much use for money. No family to send it to, no expensive habits. I have been thinking that someday I might want to start my own ranch, but that is still a long way off. Elena waited, not sure where this was going. The thing is, I could buy you a mill, a good one. Probably one of those new models that can grind a bushel of corn in an hour. It would cost me maybe $60 or $70, which sounds like a lot, but I have it more than that, actually. Mr. Thornton, I cannot possibly accept such a gift from a stranger. It would not be proper. That is why I said it would be a trade. He was speaking faster now, the words tumbling out as if he had rehearsed this speech, but was now forgetting half of it. You could feed me. I am awful tired of the bunkhouse cooking. And I remember you mentioning you sell tortillas. Best I ever tasted, folks in town say. So you could make me breakfast and supper, say 3 or 4 times a week. That would be payment enough for the mill. It was such an absurd proposition that Elena almost laughed. Mr. Thornton, a few meals a week would not come close to repaying the cost of a mill. They would to me. He met her eyes, and she saw that he was completely serious. I do not have anyone to eat with, Miss Martinez. I do not have family or friends, really. Just work and sleep and work again. Having somewhere to go, somewhere that feels like a home, even if it is not mine, that would be worth more than any mill. Elena opened her mouth to refuse again, but something stopped her. She thought about last night, about the endless grinding, about the exhaustion that never quite went away. She thought about Sophia's thin arms and Miguel's worried eyes, and little Thomas asking why his sister was always so tired. She thought about how a mill would change everything, how she could grind in an hour what now took her 4 or 5, how she might actually have time to expand the garden or take in sewing or do any of a dozen things that could bring in more money. But more than that, she thought about the loneliness in James Thornton's eyes, the hesitant hope in his voice. She recognized it because she felt it too, that deep ache of being alone in the world, of carrying burdens that were too heavy for one person but having no choice but to carry them anyway. I would need to think about it, she heard herself say. His face brightened immediately. Of course. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I can come by your place tomorrow evening if that is all right, and you can let me know your decision. Tomorrow evening would be fine. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his whole face, and Elena felt that flutter in her stomach again. This time, she did not bother trying to label it as annoyance. That night, as she ground corn until midnight once more, Elena thought about James Thornton's offer. It was irregular, certainly, unconventional. People would talk if a single cowboy started taking meals at her home several times a week. But people already talked about the Martinez family, about the poor orphaned children and their sister who was working herself to death trying to keep them fed. What did it matter if they had one more thing to gossip about? She talked it over with Miguel the next morning while they fed the chickens. At 9 years old, he was wise beyond his years, made serious and thoughtful by the losses they had all endured. Do you think he is a good man? Miguel asked, scattering corn for the hens. I think so. He seems sincere. Then I think you should say yes. You are so tired all the time, Elena. We worry about you. You should not have to worry about me. I am the grown-up. Miguel gave her a look that was far too old for his young face. We all worry about each other. That is what families do. When James Thornton arrived the next evening, riding up just as the sun was setting and painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink, Elena had made her decision. She invited him to sit on the bench outside the house, and she brought him a cup of water from their well. I have thought about your offer, Mr. Thornton, and I have some conditions. Anything you need, ma'am. First, you will call me Elena, and I will call you James, if we are going to have this arrangement. Second, the mill stays on my property. It belongs to my family. If you ever decide you want to end this arrangement, the mill remains here. Third, you will take supper with us 4 times a week, as you suggested, but you will let me know in advance which days so I can plan accordingly. And fourth, you will be respectful to my siblings at all times. They are good children, but they are children, and this is their home. James nodded seriously at each condition. I agree to all of that, and I have one condition of my own, if I may. What is that? You will let me help with any heavy work that needs doing around here. Repairs, building, things like that. Not because you are weak or incapable, but because everyone needs help sometimes, and I have the strength and the skills to offer it. Elena considered this. Pride made her want to refuse, but practicality won out. There were indeed things that needed fixing around the property, things her father would have handled if he had lived. All right, I accept your condition. They shook hands on it, and Elena was startled by how rough his palm was, as calloused as her own. Working hands, honest hands. I will go to Santa Fe next week to order the mill, James said. There's a dealer there who carries the good ones, the kind that will last for years. It will take a few weeks for it to arrive, but once it does, I will bring it out here and set it up wherever you think is best. That will be fine. Thank you, James. No, thank you, Elena. You have no idea what this means to me. He left shortly after, but not before meeting Miguel, Sophia, and Tomas, who had been peeking out the window at the tall cowboy. He was kind to them, crouching down to talk to Tomas at his level and asking Miguel about the vegetables growing in the garden. Elena watched the interaction carefully, looking for any sign of impatience or condescension, but she found none. James seemed genuinely interested in her siblings, genuinely kind. That night, as she ground corn yet again, Elena allowed herself to feel a small spark of hope. Perhaps things would get better. Perhaps this strange arrangement would work out after all. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. James came for supper on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday evenings. He always arrived promptly at 6 o'clock, his face and hands freshly washed, his hat in his hands. Elena cooked the things she knew how to cook well: tortillas and beans, chicken in red chile sauce, tamales when she had time to make them, rice with vegetables from the garden. They were simple meals, but James ate them like they were feasts, always thanking her sincerely and often asking for seconds. At first, the conversation was stilted and awkward. They were strangers, after all, brought together by an unusual arrangement. But gradually, as the days passed and they grew more comfortable with each other, the talk became easier and more natural. Elena learned that James was 25 years old, originally from Texas, and that he had come west after his parents died in a cholera outbreak when he was 19. He had a sister somewhere in Kansas, married to a farmer, but they had lost touch over the years. He had worked as a cowboy ever since, drifting from ranch to ranch until he found steady work with Mr. Carson. He was quiet by nature, more comfortable with horses than people, but he had a dry sense of humor that occasionally surprised a laugh out of Elena. James learned that Elena had dreams beyond just surviving. She wanted Miguel to go to school, to learn to read and write better than she could teach him. She wanted Sophia to have pretty dresses and the chance to be a little girl instead of a miniature adult. She wanted Tomas to grow up strong and healthy, never knowing the kind of grinding poverty that had defined Elena's life. And for herself, though she was almost embarrassed to admit it, she wanted to someday have a garden full of flowers, not just vegetables, something beautiful that served no practical purpose except to make her smile. The children took to James quickly. Miguel followed him around whenever he was there, watching as James fixed the sagging fence or reinforced the chicken coop or patched the holes in the adobe walls. Sophia shyly brought him drawings she had made, and James always examined them seriously and praised her artistic talent. Tomas simply climbed into James's lap whenever the cowboy sat down, as trusting and affectionate as a puppy. Elena tried not to notice how right it felt to have James there, how the house seemed warmer and more alive when he was sitting at their table. She tried not to notice how handsome he looked when he smiled, or how her heart beat faster when their hands accidentally brushed as she handed him his plate. This was a business arrangement, she reminded herself sternly, nothing more, but her heart was not listening to her head. 6 weeks after their agreement, a wagon arrived from Santa Fe carrying an enormous crate. James had arranged to take the day off from the ranch, and he was at Elena's property at dawn to receive the delivery. Miguel and Sophia danced with excitement as James and the delivery man unloaded the crate and pried it open to reveal the mill inside. It was beautiful, in the way that purely functional things can be beautiful. Made of cast iron and steel painted a deep green, it stood about 4 feet tall and had a large hand crank on one side. James had also ordered a sturdy wooden table to mount it on, and he spent most of the day assembling everything and positioning it under the ramada beside the house, where it would be protected from the weather but would catch the breeze. Elena watched as he worked, amazed by his skill and efficiency. He had clearly done this kind of work before, and he handled the heavy components as if they weighed nothing. By late afternoon, the mill was assembled and ready to use. "Would you like to try it?" James asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Elena approached the mill almost reverently. She poured corn kernels into the hopper at the top, then began to turn the crank. It was stiff at first, but as the mechanism engaged, it became easier. The mill made a satisfying grinding sound, and within seconds, cornmeal began to pour out of the spout at the bottom into the bowl Elena had positioned there. She cranked steadily for about 5 minutes, then stopped to check the results. The bowl was nearly full of perfectly ground cornmeal, finer and more consistent than anything she had ever achieved with the matot. She looked up at James with tears in her eyes. This would have taken me 2 hours to grind by hand. Now you can do it in 5 minutes. He was smiling, but his eyes were serious. No more grinding until midnight, Elena. No more exhausting yourself into an early grave. She could not help herself. She threw her arms around him in a spontaneous hug, then immediately stepped back, embarrassed by her forwardness. I am sorry. I did not mean to be inappropriate. You were not inappropriate. You were grateful. There is a difference. He was still smiling, and his ears were slightly pink. Besides, it is I who should be thanking you. I have eaten better in the last 6 weeks than I have in the last 6 years. That evening, Elena used the mill to grind enough corn for the next 3 days. It took her less than half an hour. After supper, when James had gone home and the children were in bed, she found herself with something she had not had in years: free time. She did not quite know what to do with it, so she sat outside and watched the stars come out, marveling at the fact that she was not falling asleep where she sat from exhaustion. The mill transformed Elena's life in ways she had not anticipated. With the hours she saved each night, she was able to expand the garden, planting more vegetables than her family could eat, and selling the surplus in town. She took in sewing and mending work from some of the wealthier families in Tucson, her neat stitches earning her a reputation as a skilled seamstress. She taught Sophia to read from her mother's old Bible, and she spent more time helping Miguel with his arithmetic. Most importantly, she was able to sleep more than 4 or 5 hours a night, and the constant exhaustion that had been her companion for so long finally began to lift. As summer turned to fall, Elena realized that she was happy. More than that, she realized that she was falling in love with James Thornton. It was a gradual thing, not a sudden revelation. It was in the way he always asked about her day, genuinely interested in the small details of her life. It was in the way he played with Tomas, letting the little boy ride on his shoulders and pretending to be a bucking bronco. It was in the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, his eyes soft and full of something that made her breath catch. It was in the way he had given her the mill without asking for anything in return except the simple pleasure of her company. She did not know if he felt the same way. He was always respectful, always proper. He never touched her except in the most casual and innocent ways, never said anything that could be construed as romantic or forward. But sometimes she caught him looking at her, and the expression in his eyes made her wonder. It was Miguel who finally said something. One evening in late October, after James had left and the children were supposed to be getting ready for bed, Miguel lingered in the kitchen while Elena cleaned up from supper. "You love him, do not you?" Miguel said without preamble. Elena's hands stilled in the dishwater. "What makes you say that?" "I see the way you look at him, the way you smile when he arrives, the way you make special effort with the cooking on the days he is coming." Miguel was sitting at the table, his thin face serious. "I think he loves you too." "Miguel, you are 9 years old. What do you know about love?" "I know that you have not smiled as much as you smile now in all the years since Papa died. I know that James is a good man who has been kind to all of us. I know that you deserve to be happy, Elena. You have given up everything for us. You should have something for yourself." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. When had her little brother become so wise? "It is not that simple, Miguel. James has never said anything about his feelings, if he even has feelings for me beyond friendship. And even if he did, I have responsibilities. I have the 3 of you to take care of. We would not be in the way. James likes us, and you could still take care of us even if you got married. Probably better because there would be 2 adults instead of 1. I cannot think about such things. It is too complicated." But of course, now that Miguel had put the thought into words, Elena could think of nothing else. She lay awake that night, not from exhaustion, but from the tumbling thoughts in her head. Did James love her? Was it possible that this strange arrangement, born out of loneliness and desperation, could become something more? She had no answer, and she was afraid to ask the question. November came. bringing cooler weather and the first hints of winter. The garden slowed its production, but Elena had canned and preserved enough vegetables to last through the cold months. She had also saved more money than ever before thanks to the extra work she was able to take on now that the mill had freed up her time. For the first time in years, she was not terrified of what would happen if one of the children got sick or if something broke that needed replacing. James continued to come for supper 4 times a week, and the children continued to adore him. Elena continued to fall more deeply in love with him, though she kept her feelings carefully hidden. She told herself that it was enough to have him as a friend, to have his help and his company. She told herself that wanting more was greedy. But then came the evening that changed everything. It was early December, and Elena had made a special meal to celebrate Tomas's 6th birthday. She had used some of her saved money to buy a small cake from the bakery in town, a rare treat that made all 3 children squeal with delight. James had brought a gift for Tomas, a little carved horse that he had made himself during the long evenings in the bunkhouse. Tomas clutched it to his chest like it was made of gold, and Elena's heart squeezed at the sight. After supper, after the cake had been eaten and the children had finally been persuaded to go to bed, Elena and James sat outside on the bench as they often did, watching the stars and talking quietly. The night was cool, but not cold, and the desert air smelled of sage and dust and the wood smoke from their cooking fire. "Thank you for the horse," Elena said. "Tomas will treasure it forever. I enjoyed making it. I used to carve things when I was a boy. It was nice to do it again." James was quiet for a moment, then said, "He is a good kid. They all are. You have done an amazing job raising them, Elena." "I have just done what needed to be done. No, it is more than that. You have given them a home full of love and security despite having nothing. You have sacrificed your own happiness to make sure they are fed and clothed and cared for. That is not just doing what needs to be done. That is extraordinary." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You are too kind." "I am not being kind. I am being honest." He turned to look at her, and even in the darkness, she could see the intensity in his eyes. "Elena, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to say it, so I'm just going to say it plain. I am in love with you. I have been for months now. Maybe from the first night I saw you grinding that corn and looking so tired and determined and beautiful. I know this arrangement was supposed to be just about the mill and the meals, but it has become so much more than that for me. You have become everything to me." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "James, Wait, let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a cowboy with some saved money and a job that keeps me busy 6 days a week. But I am a hard worker, and I am honest, and I would do everything in my power to make you happy. I would be a good father to Miguel and Sofia and Tomas. I would never ask you to change anything about your life or give up anything you love. I would just like to be a part of it if you will have me." "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes." "I know it is sudden, and I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Elena Martinez. Will you marry me?" Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. I love you too, James. I have been so afraid to admit it, so afraid that you did not feel the same way, but I have loved you for so long." And then he was kissing her, his lips warm and soft against hers, his hands cupping her face with such gentleness that it made her cry harder. It was her first kiss, and it was everything she had ever dreamed a kiss could be. It was promise and hope and belonging all wrapped up in one perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling so widely it almost hurt. "I cannot believe this is happening," Elena whispered. "Believe it. I am not going anywhere. I am yours for as long as you will have me." "Forever, then." "Forever sounds perfect." They sat there for a long time, holding hands and making plans. James would talk to Mr. Carson about building a small house on Elena's property, something bigger than the current adobe structure with enough room for all of them. He had enough saved to buy the materials, and he could do most of the building himself with help from some of the other ranch hands. They would get married in the spring after the house was finished, and they would do it properly with a priest and witnesses and a celebration. "I want to adopt the children legally," James said. "I want to be their father in every way that matters. If that is all right with you?" "It is more than all right. They already see you as a father figure. Miguel told me weeks ago that he thought you should marry me." James laughed. "That boy is wise beyond his years." "He has had to be." "Well, he will not have to grow up so fast anymore. None of them will. We will give them the childhood they deserve." Elena leaned her head on James's shoulder, feeling more content than she had ever felt in her life. The future, which had always seemed so bleak and full of struggle, suddenly looked bright and full of possibility. She had found love in the most unexpected place, and it had transformed everything. When James finally left that night, riding back toward the Carson ranch, Elena stood in the doorway and watched him go. He turned back once to wave, and she waved back, her heart full to bursting. Inside, she found Miguel sitting up in his bed, wide awake. "You said yes, did not you?" "How did you know he was going to ask?" "I saw him carving something else after he finished Tomas's horse. It looked like a ring." Elena held up her left hand, where a simple wooden ring now encircled her finger. James had apologized for not having a proper ring, but Elena had told him that this one was perfect because he had made it himself. "Yes, I said yes." Miguel grinned, looking for the first time in years like the carefree child he should have been. "Good, I like him. He will be a good father." "The best," Elena agreed. Word of the engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most people were happy for Elena, saying that she deserved some happiness after all she had been through. A few older women clucked their tongues and said it was scandalous how quickly everything had happened, but Elena found that she did not care what they thought. She was happy, truly happy, for the first time in years. James threw himself into building the new house with the same determined efficiency he had shown in setting up the mill. Mr. Carson, who turned out to be a kind employer, gave James permission to work half days for the next few months so he could focus on the building. Several of the other cowboys volunteered to help on their days off, and the house began to take shape rapidly. It was a simple structure, but it was well built and thoughtfully designed. There would be 3 bedrooms, one for Elena and James, one for the girls, and one for Miguel. There would be a real kitchen with a proper stove that James had saved up to buy, and a sitting room where they could gather in the evenings. There would be windows that let in plenty of light, and a covered porch where they could sit and watch the desert sunsets. Elena contributed to the effort by sewing curtains and cushions, making quilts for all the beds, and preparing the space where the kitchen would be. Sophia helped with the sewing, her small fingers becoming more skilled with each passing day. Miguel worked alongside James whenever he was not in school, learning carpentry and building skills that would serve him well throughout his life. Even Thomas helped, carrying small pieces of wood and fetching tools. As winter turned to spring, the house neared completion. It stood on a slight rise about 50 yards from the original adobe structure, which would be kept as a storage building and workshop. The mill stood between the 2 buildings, still under the ramada, a testament to the kindness that had brought Elena and James together. They set the wedding date for April 15th, a Saturday. Elena had saved enough money to buy fabric for a new dress, and she had spent weeks sewing it in her rare spare moments. It was simple, but beautiful, made of cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Sophia and the other women from church helped her make a small bouquet of wildflowers, and Miguel polished his shoes until they shone. James bought a new suit for the occasion, his first ever. He looked uncomfortable in it during the fittings, tugging at the collar and complaining that it was too tight, but on the day of the wedding, he looked so handsome that Elena felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting for her at the front of the little church. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. Father Gonzalez, who had baptized all 3 of Elena's siblings and who had presided over her parents' funerals, officiated. He spoke about love and commitment, about the sanctity of family, about the way God brought people together in unexpected ways. When he asked if Elena would take James to be her husband, she answered with a clear, strong "I do" that rang through the church. When he asked the same of James, the cowboy's voice was slightly choked with emotion as he said, "I do." They exchanged rings, real ones this time that James had bought in Tucson, though Elena had insisted on keeping the wooden ring as well. They kissed as husband and wife for the first time in front of God and witnesses, and everyone in the church applauded. The reception was held at the new house with tables set up outside and food prepared by friends and neighbors. There was roasted meat and fresh tortillas, beans and rice, and cakes and sweets brought by the church ladies. Someone had a guitar, and there was music and dancing as the sun set over the desert. Miguel, Sofia, and Thomas ran around with the other children, their faces bright with happiness. Elena danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. "Happy?" James murmured in her ear as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "This is just the beginning. We have our whole lives ahead of us." "I know, I can hardly believe it is real." "It is real. I am real. This love is real. And I promise you, Elena Thornton, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "I could never regret it. You saved me, James. You saved all of us." "No, you saved me. I was just drifting through life, not really living, just existing. You gave me a purpose and a family and a reason to wake up in the morning. You are my whole world." They kissed again, and the crowd cheered, and Elena felt like her heart might burst from sheer joy. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep in their new bedrooms in their new house, Elena and James lay together in their own bedroom for the first time as husband and wife. They made love slowly and tenderly, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered words. It was Elena's first time, and James was patient and careful, making sure she felt safe and loved. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams for the future. "I want to give you children of our own," James said, stroking her hair. "If you want that. I know you have already raised 3 kids, and I will understand if you would rather not." "I want your children," Elena said without hesitation. "I want a house full of life and love and laughter. I want our children to grow up knowing they are wanted and cherished. I want to build a real family with you, James." "Then that is what we will do." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. James continued to work at the Carson Ranch, but now he came home every night to his own house, his own wife, his own family. Elena continued to grind corn with her mill, to tend her garden, to sew and cook and care for the children. But now she did these things without the grinding exhaustion that had defined her life before. Now she did them with joy, knowing that she was building something lasting and good. Miguel thrived under James's guidance, learning not just carpentry and ranching skills, but also how to read better and do more complex arithmetic. James had a patient teaching style, and he encouraged Miguel to ask questions and think critically. By the time Miguel was 10, he could read as well as many adults, and he had developed a passion for learning that would serve him well throughout his life. Sofia blossomed under the security of having a stable home and a father figure. She was a creative child, always drawing or making up stories, and both Elena and James encouraged her artistic pursuits. James built her a little desk where she could draw and write, and Elena bought her pencils and paper whenever they could afford it. Sofia began to dream of becoming a teacher someday so she could help other children learn and grow. Tomas, who had been so young when James entered their lives, grew up thinking of James as simply Papa and Elena as Mama. He had no real memories of the hard times before, which was exactly what Elena and James wanted. He was a boisterous, happy child, full of energy and mischief, and he kept everyone on their toes. In the summer of 1883, a little over a year after James had first knocked on Elena's door, she discovered she was pregnant. She told James the news one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same porch where he had first proposed to her. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. James's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, settling finally on pure happiness. "A baby. Our baby. Yes. Are you happy?" "Happy? Elena, I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." He pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "When?" "I think sometime in late February or early March. We are going to be parents." "You are already a parent, a wonderful parent to 3 children." "You know what I mean. This is different. This is a baby we made together, out of our love for each other." The children were excited about the prospect of a new sibling. Miguel, now 10, took his role as oldest brother very seriously and promised to help take care of the baby. Sophia, who was 8, immediately began drawing pictures of what she thought the baby would look like. Tomas, now 6, was mostly just interested in whether the baby would be able to play with him. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Elena was often tired in the first few months. James was attentive and careful, making sure she did not overwork herself, taking on extra chores around the house to lighten her load. Mr. Carson, hearing about the pregnancy, gave James a raise and a promise of a bonus when the baby was born. The rancher had developed a real affection for James over the years, and he was pleased to see his hardest-working cowboy settling down and starting a family. As Elena's belly grew, so did the sense of anticipation in the household. James began building a cradle in his spare time, sanding and carving it with the same care he had used to carve Tomas's wooden horse. Elena sewed tiny gowns and blankets, marveling at how small they were. The children took turns talking to the baby through Elena's belly, telling it about all the things they would do together once it was born. In late February of 1884, on a cool, clear night with a million stars overhead, Elena went into labor. James sent Miguel running to fetch the midwife, an older woman named Senora Gutierrez who had delivered half the babies in the county. James stayed with Elena, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. It was a long labor, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Elena had attended enough births, including her mother's final one, to know that something about this felt different, harder. But Senora Gutierrez remained calm and confident, and James never left her side. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths, helped her change positions, and told her over and over that she was strong and brave and that everything would be all right. Finally, as the sun was reaching its zenith, the baby was born. It was a boy, healthy and loud, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. James cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. "He is perfect," James whispered. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Daniel James Thornton, and he was indeed perfect. He was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in decent stretches. Miguel, Sophia, and Tomas were fascinated by him, taking turns holding him under careful supervision and marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Elena recovered quickly from the birth, and within a few weeks she was back to her normal routines. Having a baby was work, certainly, but it was different from the grinding, desperate work of her earlier years. This was work done out of love, work that brought joy rather than exhaustion. And she had James to help her, getting up with the baby in the night when he could, changing diapers, bouncing Daniel when he was fussy. The first year of Daniel's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. His first smile, his first laugh, his first tooth, the way he lit up when he saw his father come home from work, the way Sophia sang to him to help him fall asleep, the way Miguel made faces to make him laugh, the way Tomas insisted on showing him every bug and lizard he found in the yard. Life was not perfect. There were still hard times, months when money was tight, illnesses that scared them, arguments that left them both frustrated. But through it all, Elena and James had each other. They had built something real and lasting, a family bound together by love and commitment and the shared experience of overcoming hardship. When Daniel was 18 months old, Elena discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do. In the spring of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine Rose, after James's mother. Catherine was as different from Daniel as two babies could be, small and delicate, where he had been sturdy and robust, quiet, where he had been loud. But she was just as loved, just as wanted. Miguel was now 13, on the cusp of young manhood. He had grown tall and strong, with his father's serious dark eyes and Elena's determination. He had decided that he wanted to become a teacher, inspired by the joy he found in learning and by his desire to help other children get an education. James and Elena supported this dream, saving money to eventually send him to the territorial normal school in Tucson. Sophia was 11, still artistic and creative, but also developing a strong sense of justice and fairness. She hated seeing people treated unfairly and was always the first to stand up for the underdog. She had decided that she wanted to be a lawyer someday. Though she knew it would be difficult for a woman, James told her that if anyone could do it, she could, and that he and Elena would support her however they could. Tomas was 9, full of energy and enthusiasm for life. He loved horses and had a natural talent for riding. James had started teaching him ranch work, and Thomas was proving to be a quick study. He talked constantly about becoming a cowboy like his papa, and James beamed with pride every time he said it. The family continued to grow and thrive. The ranch that Elena's father had started was now productive and profitable, with a large garden, chickens, a few pigs, and even a small herd of cattle that James was building up slowly. The mill still stood under the ramada, a constant reminder of the kindness that had started everything. Elena still used it several times a week, but now she ground corn for pleasure rather than desperation, making fresh tortillas for her growing family. In 1888, when Daniel was 4 and Catherine was 2, Elena found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, leaving her tired and uncomfortable. But in the late winter of 1889, she gave birth to healthy twin boys, whom they named Samuel and Benjamin. The house that had once seemed so spacious was now full to bursting with 7 children and 2 adults. But no one minded the chaos. It was the chaos of love and life and family. Mr. Carson had retired by then, selling the ranch to his oldest son. The younger Carson had offered James a position as foreman with a significant increase in pay. James accepted gratefully, knowing that the extra money would help support their growing family. He was now responsible for managing the ranch's operations and supervising the other cowboys, a job he took seriously and performed well. The years passed in a blur of birthdays and holidays, of scraped knees and childhood illnesses, of school plays and harvest festivals. Miguel graduated from the Territorial Normal School and took a teaching position in Tucson, where he taught children from some of the poorest families in the city. He met a young woman named Maria, the daughter of a shopkeeper, and they were married in 1892. Elena cried happy tears at her brother's wedding, proud of the man he had become. Sophia, true to her word, pursued her dream of becoming a lawyer. It took her longer than it would have taken a man, and she faced discrimination and closed doors at every turn. But she was brilliant and stubborn, and she eventually found a lawyer in Phoenix who was willing to take her on as a clerk and teach her the profession. She studied law books late into the night and passed the territorial bar exam on her first try in 1895, becoming one of the first female lawyers in Arizona. Elena and James made the trip to Phoenix for her swearing-in ceremony, bursting with pride. Thomas became a cowboy as he had always dreamed, working first on the Carson Ranch alongside his father and then eventually starting his own horse ranch with money he had saved and a loan from James. He had a natural way with horses, able to gentle the wildest Mustang with patience and kindness. He married a rancher's daughter named Lucy in 1896, and they began building their own family. Meanwhile, Daniel, Catherine, Samuel, and Benjamin were growing up in a house full of love and laughter. Daniel was serious and studious like Miguel, already showing an aptitude for numbers and business. Catherine was artistic and gentle, with a passion for music that James indulged by buying her a used piano when she was 8. Samuel and Benjamin were inseparable, two halves of a whole, with Samuel being the careful planner and Benjamin being the adventurous risk-taker. In 1898, Elena and James celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 40s now, James's hair showing threads of silver and Elena's face bearing the lines of a life well lived. They had 7 children between them, 2 biological, and 5 they had either raised from childhood or brought into the world together. The little plot of land that had once been more burden than blessing was now a thriving ranch. The mill still stood where James had first placed it, a testament to where their love story had begun. On the evening of their anniversary, after the children had been put to bed and the house was finally quiet, Elena and James sat on the porch as they had done so many times over the years. The desert night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. "Do you ever think about that night?" Elena asked, leaning her head on James's shoulder. "The night you first came to my door?" "All the time. I think about how close I came to just riding past, about how different our lives would be if I had. I was grinding corn until midnight, so exhausted I could barely stand. I remember thinking that this was all in my life would ever be. Work and exhaustion and worry. And now? Now I have everything I ever dreamed of and more. I have a husband I love more than words can express. I have children who are healthy and happy and growing into wonderful people. I have a home that is full of love. I have a future that looks bright instead of bleak. All because of a mill. No, not because of a mill. Because of you. Because you saw someone in need and you helped without expecting anything in return. Because you were kind to a stranger. Because you fell in love with a tired woman with 3 orphan siblings and you were not afraid to take on that responsibility. Best decision I ever made, James said, kissing the top of her head. You and the children gave my life meaning. Before you, I was just drifting. After you, I had a purpose, a home, a family, everything that matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the desert. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness. A coyote yipped in the distance. The wind rustled through the sage, carrying the scent of dust and possibility. "Do you remember what I said I wanted back when we were first getting to know each other?" Elena asked. "You wanted Miguel to go to school, Sophia to have pretty dresses, and Tomas to grow up healthy. And you wanted a garden full of flowers. We made all of that happen. Miguel went to school and became a teacher. Sophia had pretty dresses and is now a lawyer. Tomas grew up healthy and strong. And look." She gestured toward the garden, which was now indeed full of flowers. In addition to the vegetables they grew for food, Elena had gradually added roses and marigolds and zinnias, and a dozen other types of flowers. They served no practical purpose except to be beautiful, and Elena tended them lovingly. "We did make it happen," James agreed, "together. I love you, James Thornton. I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that." "I love you too, Elena. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows as all years do. James's health began to decline in his late 50s, the hard work of ranching finally taking its toll on his body. But he continued to work as long as he was able, finally retiring fully at 62 to spend his days at home with Elena. They had 12 grandchildren by then, with more on the way, and James delighted in being a grandfather, spoiling the grandchildren in ways he had never been able to spoil his own children. Elena remained healthy and active well into her 60s, still tending her garden, still cooking for the family gatherings that happened nearly every Sunday, still using the mill that James had given her so many years ago. The mill had been repaired and maintained over the years, but it still functioned perfectly, still turned out perfectly ground cornmeal with just a few turns of the crank. On a warm evening in June of 1912, 30 years to the month after James had first knocked on Elena's door, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Miguel was there with Maria and their 4 children, all of them now grown. Sophia was there with her husband, a fellow lawyer, and their 2 daughters. Tomas was there with Lucy and their 3 sons. Daniel was there with his wife and 2 children. Catherine was there with her husband and new baby. Samuel and Benjamin, now in their 20s and still inseparable, were both there with their young wives. The house and yard were full of people, 3 generations of family, all descended from the union of a desperate woman grinding corn and a lonely cowboy who had stopped to help. There was food and laughter, children running and playing, adults catching up and telling stories. As the sun set and the stars came out, James stood up and called for everyone's attention. "I want to say something," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. 30 years ago tonight, I was riding home from Tucson, and I saw a light burning in a little adobe house. I could have ridden past. I almost did. But something made me stop, and that decision changed my entire life. I met a woman who was working herself to death trying to take care of her family. I bought her a mill thinking I was helping her, but really she was the one who saved me. She gave me a family, a home, a reason to live. Everything good in my life came from that night." He turned to look at Elena, who was standing beside him with tears in her eyes. "Elena, you are the love of my life. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible. Every day with you has been a gift." Elena could not speak, could only hold his hand and nod, her heart too full for words. Miguel stood up next. "James, you have been more than a father to me. You have been a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. You took on 3 orphan children without hesitation, and you raised us as your own. Everything I am, everything I have accomplished, I owe to you and Elena." Sophia spoke next, her lawyer's eloquence on full display. "You taught me that I could be anything I wanted to be, regardless of what society said a woman could or could not do. You supported my dreams even when they seemed impossible. I will be forever grateful for your faith in me." Tomas, usually a man of few words, simply said, "You are the best father a man could ask for. Thank you for everything." One by one, the children and grandchildren stood and shared what James and Elena meant to them. By the end, there was not a dry eye in the crowd. It was a celebration not just of 30 years of marriage, but of family, of love, of the power of simple kindness to transform lives. James lived for another 3 years after that celebration, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1915 at the age of 66. Elena was devastated by his loss, feeling like half of herself had been torn away, but she took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy of love they had built together. She continued to live at the ranch, tending her gardens and grinding corn with the mill James had given her, the mill that had started everything. Elena lived to be 87 years old, passing away in 1947 surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. On her deathbed, she held the wooden ring that James had carved for her when he proposed, the ring she had worn on a chain around her neck for the 32 years since his death. Her last words were, "Tell James I am coming home." The mill remained on the property, cared for by succeeding generations of the family. It became a symbol of the family's history, a reminder of where they had come from and the love that had made everything possible. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren learned to use it, grinding corn the way Elena had taught them. The story of Elena and James was passed down through the generations, told and retold until it became family legend. The ranch itself remained in the family, expanding over the years to include more land and more buildings. But the original house that James had built, the house where he and Elena had raised their family, was preserved and maintained. The garden that Elena had planted with its vegetables and flowers was tended lovingly. The bench where James had proposed was kept painted and repaired. It became a place where family members went when they needed to feel connected to their history, to remember where they had come from. In the end, the love story of Elena and James was about more than just 2 people falling in love. It was about kindness transforming lives, about the power of human connection, about the way one moment of compassion can ripple out through generations. It was about a woman who was grinding corn until midnight each night, exhausted and desperate and alone. It was about a cowboy who bought a mill and put it on her land, not expecting anything in return except maybe a few home-cooked meals. It was about how that simple act of generosity blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that would endure for generations. It was about how, in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, two lonely people found each other and built something beautiful. It was about family and home and the enduring power of love to transform even the darkest circumstances into something bright and hopeful and good. It was about how the smallest act of kindness can change the world, at least for one person, and how that change can ripple outward to touch countless other lives. And it all started with the sound of grinding stone on stone in the darkness, and a cowboy who stopped to help a stranger. That was how Elena Martinez became Elena Thornton, how 3 orphaned children found a father, how a struggling piece of land became a thriving ranch, and how a lonely cowboy found the home he had been searching for all his life. It was a love story set against the backdrop of the American West, a story of hardship and hope, of loss and love, of the way two people can save each other and build something that lasts forever.